Good evening, church. Kama wachitiwa nnyo. Welcome to our second day, our second Wednesday of this mini suffering series. I hope you're taking in suffering differently, right? Already. So last Wednesday was kind of an intro and definitions and a few other things that Reverend Raymond spoke about, and today I think it gets into the real thing, right? Just to remind you, if you have any questions along this series, please write them down, and we'll have a Q&A series, Q&A session, not series, Q&A session at the very end. And if it stretches, if you have more questions, maybe we'll stretch a couple of other Wednesdays. We are flexible to learn as much as possible. And so with that, let's welcome Raymond for session 2.
Great. Thank you very much, Pastor Zedi. And thank you very much, everyone that has labored to be here. After treating you to some suffering last week, you are willing to suffer again. And I promise that we will suffer together, okay? As Pastor Zedi said last week, we are fellow sufferers, not so? And as we shall see, last week we also saw that inevitably, because of natural evil and moral evil, natural evil found in nature, moral evil found in our hearts, inevitably, suffering seems to be part of our life, all right? Now, I think what Pastor Zed has said in the intro is that we had an introduction last week. We had an overview last week, and we particularly looked at the problem side. And I promised that this week I ended at theodicies. I ended at reasons why God would permit evil. And those reasons are imagined but also perceived because there is something that points to them. However, I asked you, what if you were God? Right? Those of you that were here, you remember last week, we defined suffering, didn't we? We differentiated it from evil, didn't we? Okay, we tried to understand what kind of problem evil is and how in its natural, right, natural format, or rather natural and moral forms, it causes suffering. Okay, so we looked at that. I particularly introduced the problem side, and I focused on the problem side. And that problem side put God in the dock, if you remember very well. We realized this is God's problem. He can actually solve it. And we imagined, what if we were God? What if you were God? How would you solve it? That's when the theodicies came in. But I proposed also that I see suffering as a coin. I see it has two sides. I see it as a story. Like every good story, it has how many sides? 2. And you're always waiting for the second one. When the one is dominant and it is not nice, if a movie is too good, prepare for the bad side somewhere, all right? But I also made a major claim. I said, today, I potentially am one of those guys who have a big collection of resources on suffering. I want to treat you just to show you some. Some of them, I'm just going to read out a few titles. Can you give me some of those books? And I just ran to one section of my library, and I picked a few of them. And I said, okay, so this one is Why Suffering? So the question is genuine, not so? Why Suffering? And the subtitle is Finding Meaning and Comfort When Life Doesn't Make Sense. Do you encounter that sometimes? When life doesn't make sense? Right. And Cries of the Heart is one of those books, okay? Bringing God nearer when he feels so far. So sometimes in suffering, God feels like he is extremely far. You wonder where actually he is. Is God to blame? All right? Beyond pat answers to the problem of suffering. And many of these actually focus on the story, highlight the story that we're going to look at, the story of Job at some point. Broken Planet is, if there is a God, then why are there natural disasters and diseases? Why? Sincerely, why? All right? Then this one was a major one Of course, all of them I've used them, but this one was a major one when I was thinking through my thesis. Christianity and Suffering, African Perspectives, okay? And then, this one is a classic that I love so much. It is by Alistair McGrath. It is Simply Suffering, and it is based on storytelling. Even this one is based on storytelling. It tells a lot of stories about many disasters that we witness in the world. This is a Grief Observed. I did not carry I looked for my copy of The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, but at least I got this one. Grief Observed. He had written the Problem of Pain before he wrote this. And we will talk about this guy at some point. But in a nutshell, this guy writes his journey of watching a wife he married while in hospital suffering from cancer. He writes his story of what he experienced when he watches her die. Now, that is just, I can't even say it is a tip of the iceberg. I've been on a journey of picking any book that says suffering. I know a friend of mine who deals in books, with an organization that deals in books. Every time I'm looking at their bookstore, I'm looking for, is there any book on suffering? I also told you that I had the privilege of writing on suffering or about suffering at an academic level. I mentioned that I had got my master's. I'd written my dissertation on the particular question of suffering, but from an African perspective. I did research, and one of my questions during the research, I thought I should give you a sneak peek into my data. I should just give you some of my data. I asked people what was the major cause of suffering, and I did this both in Kampala and Karamoja. And the number one, abantu bako obwavu, number one, coming in at 87.3% was poverty, illiteracy, unemployment, and such external factors. Do you understand? What you find getting very little, of course, there is punishment from God coming in at 22%, reckless human activity coming in at 35%. I don't know, things just happen, coming in at 8%. Witchcraft and sorcery coming in at 38%. Political unrest and corruption in our country coming in at 62%. Diseases and such other natural disasters like floods coming in at a combined 80% as well. You notice that humans are very careful to involve themselves in these things. They refer to the government and politicians and everybody, okay? Right? But you remember last week we looked at suffering can be self-inflicted, not so? It can be inflicted by others. It can be sacrificial. It could also be mysterious, innocent. You have nothing to say about it. I also asked people, what was the place of God? When you're processing suffering, where is God in this dilemma? This is what people say. Coming in at 81.3% is he's aware and is able to deal with it. The interesting data would be, coming in at 44%, he uses it to teach lessons. They're very important. So you're thinking, okay, he's aware, yes. But he causes it to punish people, 16%. Okay, punish those that do wicked things. The other, he is the causer and the solver, coming in at 19%. He lets bad things happen to see if we will return to him. All right? The one that is interesting, that we need to also pay attention to, comes in at 0%. He is indifferent. He just watches as people suffer. If you do not pay attention to that data, the question becomes difficult. No one points to God as being indifferent. What does that suggest? That potentially God, he's doing something. We have a clue, we have an idea that God is doing or has done something. We may not know what exactly that was. And that made me feel like I need to continue my research. And I remember saying, someone was interested, what was your master's about? I said, it was missions, master in missions. And the reason I researched about suffering, I wanted to see how do we find a missiological value in suffering. By that, how do we leverage suffering and use it for mission, to reach out to others, to witness, actually, to others. And I thought, because of what I'd seen in Karamoja, I wanted to see whether there was an African perspective. Indigenous has nothing to do with Western or other influence, okay, that can be used to make a case for the existence of God, his presence and work amongst the suffering, and hence unapologetic. And I want to tell you, I found it among the Karimojong. And I'll share it as part of the 4 categories or stories that I'm going to tell. Those of you that were here, I talked about the coin, the tails and the heads, privilege and pain. And the coin needs, if you want to value for legal tender in a coin, you need both the head and the tail, all right? For each coin. And I suggest that if we are going to ultimately understand suffering, we need to look at both the pain, which is always boldly and loudly in our faces and our ears, but also we need to see or intentionally turn the coin and see the privileged side. Of course, some people will be like, unthinkable, unimaginable. How do you even suggest that there is privilege in suffering? One of such is Marilyn Adams, an American philosopher, and a Christian as well, who suggests in her book, Horrendous Evils and the Goodness of God. She says, suffering, some evils are so horrendous, so terrible, that we only want to look at them if we ever, once, and we look away. And they make even the most pious believer question not only life's worth, but also God's power and goodness. And this is an essential fundamental dilemma for Christian thought. How we reconcile what you claim to be faith in God and the evils that afflict either you or people you love so much, and sometimes even take them to the grave. I asked you, if you were God, what would you do? I wanted to show you a video this evening as we go forward, but because I've not been able to get it to show, I will describe it. Or let me do this actually. So last week I told you my baby, my little girl, how old was she? Who remembers? Exactly, she was 6 weeks last week. So something normally happens to babies at 6 weeks. It's called vaccination, okay? So I was here on Wednesday. On Friday, we took her. And this is what happened. This is one of the videos, okay? But listen to the sound. That is, we are not done. I recorded that. Meaning I watched, but I told them I will never give them my daughter again. Now, did my daughter understand what was going on? Do you think she was angry at me? Do you think she's blaming me? What I did to my daughter that day was a loving act. Not the recording of the video, but getting her into the car and driving her to the hospital and subjecting her to that pain. Someday, those of you in Uganda, you know very well, the revolutionaries always tell us that before 1986, you people, you were dying of killer diseases, the 6 ones. Not so. Today, all the immunizable diseases are immunized. Not so. Even painfully so. Now, when you watch that video, you will hate me. Maybe, maybe not. Because she really cries and I'm recording it. But I'm not enjoying it. However, I know what's going on. Someday she will understand. In fact, someday, if she grows to have her own children, she's most likely going to do the same. Right? Because that pain has its own purpose and value. However, I'm almost trying to make up a theodicy. A good reason why I allowed my daughter to go through that sort of pain and cry and cry. Today's session is about going beyond theodicy. We want to look together at the different perspectives. Because the truth is, whether you're a Christian or not, suffering hits us all. believe me or not. And it hits very bad. But how do we process it? How does the non-Christian process it? How does the African process it? How does the materialist process it? How does the one who has all riches process the fact that they cannot just take away sickness? All right? So I want us to look at the different perspectives from different parts of the world on the problem or the privilege in suffering. Then I want to describe what I mean by privilege. I want to clarify. And I hope by the end of the day, we will have looked at 4 categories in the next 30 minutes or something. All right? And I hope that we will have a better way to respond to suffering than blame God or remove him from the picture and place ourselves or something else. And perhaps we will also have figured out that evil and suffering does not ultimately make life meaningless and purposeless as sometimes we perceive it. All right? All right? And let's not also try to get God off the dock, like trying to rescue him or defend him. He himself is okay. He's willing to take responsibility. Those of you that have read the scriptures, for example, in Isaiah 45, he says, I create even evil. He is daring to say that. And there are many places where he's willing to say, I have willed everything in existence. And you ask yourself, God, are you sure even mosquitoes sincerely? All right? I mean, those of you that have received warning messages in this heat wave, we have been told, close all windows because because snakes might creep in. Have you received that message? Yeah. I mean, and then it is hot, and then you have to close all windows. So you're scared, but you're thinking, God, can't you just keep out snakes from my house? And I sleep peacefully, all right? Anyway, naturalists and secularists or non-believing agnostics and atheists have come to a conclusion that because of suffering and evil, we have evidence and proof before us that either the universe is badly designed, it is evidence of a bad design, right? Hence, the way we live life, or that there is even no designer at all. Hence, no what? No God. God doesn't exist. Suffering then becomes inevitable chaos, right? Orchestrated by mindless and purposeless forces of nature. Man being an agent as well. You get it? So it's not like other forces of nature, but man inclusive. Such are Christopher Hitchens, the late Richard Dawkins, still alive, and many others. That's what they think. But their goal is to get God out of the picture. And one critic, a poet called Steve Turner, and I get this poem out of one of Ravi Zacharias' books. Also, Ravi is dead, is the late Ravi Zacharias. He wrote a book, Can Man Live Without God? And on page 42 to 44 is a long poem by Steve Turner. And I'll give you just the ending bit. His criticism or rather critique and response to the naturalist. He says, we believe that each man must find truth that is right for him. Reality can adapt accordingly. The universe will adjust, will readjust. History will alter. We believe that there is no absolute truth except the truth that there is no absolute truth. We believe in the rejection of creeds and the flowering of individual thought. If chance be the father of all flesh, disaster is the rainbow in the sky. And when you hear state of emergency, sniper kills 10, troops on rampage, whites looting, I don't know why he's intentional, right? That language, whites go looting, bomb blast a school. It is but the sound of man worshiping his maker, nature. What do you hear there? Chaos. And if nature be the father of all flesh, then when you see that chaos, it is simply worship to our maker. When you see evil and suffering, it is simply worship to our maker. What is our maker? Nature. He's simply criticizing and saying, so you cannot be raising this problem because if our maker is nature, that is and we are just moving by if mindless and purposeless agency and motion, then you shouldn't be surprised that this is what we're having. Does the removal of God then remove the problem of evil and suffering? Do you think now we don't have it? No. We have actually just made it worse because we have no hope at all. However, they are not the only thinkers. From the East, we have the Japanese and the Buddhists. If you've heard about karma, have you heard about karma? You know what you do comes back to you, not so? Yes, they believe that the existence of suffering and evil is as a result of wrong living, hence karma, or too much loving. We suffer because we love too much. If you don't love too much, you won't suffer. Test it. You love someone, they die, you feel the pain, the grief. That's what they suggest. But we also love things too much. We love life too much. Any pain comes to us, a threat of death, we feel it because we love. So they suggest don't love too much, but also live rightly, hence reincarnate and live in a good environment. If everybody does the same, then our reincarnation means we all live in a good atmosphere. However, because of what they have also observed in their existence, they seem to regard suffering to contain a form of privilege. They suggest that it shakes humanity out of short-sighted complacency, moving us towards thinking about the essentials of life. Kupi Blai wrote in one of his songs called Webale. You can look it up. In the first stanza, he says, he woke up in the morning prepared for a fight with God because he had been asking for many things and God seems not to be coming through. A house, new clothes, a new pair of shoes, and God is not coming through. But he says as he moved through the streets of his ghetto, he found a guy who did not have feet. And he said, oh God, back off, it's okay. It's okay, I have feet and I have old shoes, I can live with that. It moves humanity from short-sighted complacency to thinking about the essentials of life. Guess how they conclude? They suggest that humans ought to pay for suffering. Why? Because it proved to contain particular lessons no form of education, no level of education can teach you. They suggest you should pay for your suffering. That is Eastern thought. And I remember when the BBC was quoting them, part of August, yes, I'm glad this is projecting. What you see there on the projection is a pottery, a piece of pottery that had been broken but put back together using gold. It's called let me get the Japanese, kintsugi. It's called kintsugi. Kintsugi is the art of putting back broken pieces using gold, making the latter, the newer piece, more valuable and expensive than the former. Suggesting that life, going through brokenness, contains a value greater than what it was before. And the BBC quoting or looking at that mode of art suggests that in an age of mass production and quick disposal, learning to accept and celebrate scars and flaws is a powerful lesson in humanity and sustainability. The Japanese and the Buddhists and the Eastern, they're not the only thinkers. Let's come to Africa. The Baganda are brilliant, but I will go to Karamoja. All right? If you were here in 2022, you must have seen the headline highlighting 900, but they were not the only ones. There were thousands of people who died of hunger. Hunger, when some of us were throwing away food, when some of us were living on luxury, when some of us were confused, should I eat this or the other one? All right? Should I go to Java's or KFC? People were dying of hunger. And it's not the first time. Year in, year out, there'll be someone who succumbs because they did not get a meal. Those are the Karimojong. In my dissertation, I refer to them as a suffering community. I know it. They are characterized with drought, famine, ethnic conflict, cattle rustling, illiteracy, poverty, disease, political and economic marginalization, and other markers of low standards of living. If I could read for you there, they live in what you would regard as absolute poverty. All right? And I want to tell you, when I was living there, I remember in 2012, I was living on about 100 pounds. At the time, it was about 4,000 shillings at the time, maybe around that. And I applied for a visa to the UK. And the man told me, living on £100, I let you go to the UK, you won't return. No, denied. All right? And I thought, this guy doesn't know that I am rich here. I am loaded every 400,000 in 2011 in Karamoja. I was rich, very. I had the luxury of data. I could eat whatever I want. He looked at me as poor. He did not know the reality. All right? But these guys live in poverty. Education levels are very high. Water is scarce. You think it is hot right now? I dare you. I dare you to go north. The degrees are insane. They don't have the luxuries of ACs. They don't have the luxuries of trees. They don't have the luxury of buildings shielding them. They don't have the luxury of getting cold water. I know it. What you see in the next picture or slide is a situation I watched in 2011 February. That that entire homestead got burnt because, that one up there, because there was a man, in February, they're preparing for the agricultural season. It is very hot and windy. The man was just burning the bush to clear the land to be plowed and planted. The wind blew the fire onto the manyata. Their manyatas are made of, small pieces of wood, which over the time, because of their climate, dry. You understand? It makes them vulnerable to any small fire. That fire that was intended to buy the bush burnt down an entire manyata with the granaries. So what you see there is them trying to save food, and there's a picture that I may not have included of them wandering to use the water to pour it on the food or to drink it. And the guy just picked up the jerrycan, put it on his mouth, and drank some of the water. This is 2011 in February. And one of the things that disturbed me most was because I was there on behalf of the church, and we invited them to gather and we pray. And a man remarked and said, you pray and go. After all, that's all the church can do. And we did. God gave us the grace to do more. Anyway, what you see are sources of water, the borehole and the collection, the dam there. Can you switch off the light again? Thank you. Yes, so that one, the water you see being collected in the jerrycans, I dare you to imagine it is for animals. The animals come and collect theirs from there. They drink it from the same place. Then they take theirs home to use it for everything they can use it for. At the same time, some will have had their shower right there because they can't waste time taking water home for a shower. Everything I'm telling you, I saw, I witnessed, because I lived there 7 years. But I saw a different kind of people. And I said in my research, I have to know why. Because when I lived with them, I told you last week, their suffering I saw, I witnessed, but it wasn't mine. It was not personal, it was relational. I would live there once a month or once in 2 months, or even twice a month. I would be in Kampala, back to my home, and then go back and I return. If I wanted to eat pizza, I would return. I wondered, why are they resilient? Why are they so hopeful? I witnessed explosive church growth. If you were to look into my research, you would see the data. I planted churches. I was there to see church plants. I was there to see people who had not gone to school, learning to read the Bible and proclaiming the gospel, and others believe and come to the Lord. And churches being planted under trees, in classrooms, in small communities, and they're gathering to listen to the gospel and believing. And I wondered, how? I witnessed worship. I witnessed witness in a suffering community. When I went back to find out why, one of the many things that came out that I picked as gold dust and diamonds was the parable that I'm about to give you. In Karimojong it says, awakwe ka ingok. Awakwe ka ingok. The dog and the fox standing face to face. The story says that the Karimojong dog was tired of being beaten so much in the community. And someday it ran away from home. And it went to the bush. And in the bush, it met face to face with a fox. And the fox identified it as its own kin. You know, the fox and the dog. The fox took the dog around the bush, and the dog learned to live in the bush, and it was no longer, it no longer needed to fight with humans over their food, and it could survive. So the saying goes, like a Karimojong dog, my suffering too will one day come to an end when I come face to face with the one who knows and identifies me as his likeness, as his own. I had never heard of that story. I'd never heard of that parable. I'd never heard of that saying in the 7 years. It's when I went back to do my research that I heard it, and I was like, wait a minute, that sounds biblical. Because I saw Karimojong dogs being beaten every day, and I couldn't believe. I love dogs so much. I feed them. But in a community where you don't have food, dogs don't have the luxury of food. It's only when an animal has been killed that they will get a chance to eat the bone, not the meat. In Karamoja, most dogs, majority of the dogs genuinely eat bones. And we know it, dogs eat bones. Friends, that was encouraging. That was mind-blowing. But the questions lingered. Why them? Why? If God wants to teach me such a wonderful lesson, if he wants to reveal it, why them? And all the reasons you could imagine from the theodicies, but also from those that you could come up with. Some people would say, God is punishing them. And I've heard that teaching. That the Karimojong, first of all, Karamoja, the name Karamoja, comes from the statement, Nkari Kamojong. The old man is tired and he will die from there. The story is told that when the Karimojong migrated from Abyssinia and came through Ethiopia to northern Kenya, downwards, they are pastoralists, okay? They're moving around looking for water for their animals and pasture. And so when they got to the region Karamoja, the old ones got too tired and they remained in that dry section. But the younger ones proceeded and arrived in Teso. They met pasture and water, they remained. Those of you that have traveled this country, you'll know that Teso is greener and has water. So they remained there, the younger ones, and grew older. The cows grew, they gave birth. The elders sent messengers and said, hey, Nidwe, bring back the cows. Ate, they said, no, we can't come back there. Here is better, you old people come. The old people said, we can't. They said, you have refused to bring back our cows. They cast them. They said, where you are will become a place of graves, Atesin. So when you hear Iteso, Atesin is a place of graves. That's what they cast them. So the young ones also replied with a curse. You old men are tired, you will die from there. There's nothing you can do to us. And apparently, that's their identity. That's how they speak. Some people can imagine. And when they see young people, Karimojong, begging on the street, they say, their land has vomited. They invoke scripture. The land shall vomit you. What did they do to God? What did they do to God? Apparently because of their Karamoja traditional religion, because they worship in the Ngakiriketia, their shrines. They worship the trees, they worship the mountains, they worship the snake, they worship other stuff. It has been said that they're guilty of idolatry. But what about you? Why not you? Okay? I remember during a Bible study in 2011, about November, a lady asked, what did we do to God for us to be like this? And she was asking because of people she had seen visit and others on TV. She said, why are other people in the world having better life than us? What should we do for God to love us like them? What have we done? What should we do? Some have said, these people are lazy. I have heard these things being said about the Karimojong. Some have said, no, it is the displeasure of the gods of your ancestors. So they've gone back to worship their ancestors and please them. I remember in 2015, there was a very long drought. There was rains delayed to come. And I'll never forget witnessing, I had not seen it. I remember witnessing a procession of women going around drumming, singing, and enchanting. And I wondered what they were doing. And I was told that in the days building up to that, 21 goats had been slaughtered to the ancestors to bless the land and release rain. And this was probably the last feet of them going around and chanting and calling and doing all sorts of funny things. I'd never seen it. Some will see there are people who hate Karimojong people, and therefore they have spoken ill to them. Have you heard of malevolent, bad people who proclaim bad things or curse, like we said earlier on? Now, I've brought in the naturalists, how they respond. They put God out of the picture. The Karimojong don't do that, actually. They are going to the shrine is to go to Akuj, the distant god. They are crying out is to see, is the distant God, the God who is above all things, will he help? Will he send rain? Will he send food? And so when aid goes, when the government helps, some of them go and thank Akuj. And in my intro there, I'd mentioned that Karamoja has one of the largest number of NGOs working in the region because the government is unable to meet the need. Hunger is genuine every other day. Those of you that watched last year and the previous year, Japan has to come in and send rice. The UAE sent rice. People send cowpeas, they send. The World Food Organization and others have to send, is it World Food Organization? What is it called? The WFA or whatever it is. They have to send in food. Many things have to be done. We have to do something. Not because food can't grow in Karamoja, by the way. There are parts of Karamoja where food can actually grow. But it's a difficult situation because not everybody can go to that same place anyway. All right? But is God punishing them? If that is the Karimojong situation, the Eastern thought, the secularist thought and Western thought, what is the Christian thought about suffering? What do Christians think about suffering? I told you last week that quickly we go to the fall and say, because Adam and Eve did what? Because of our free will. And that is not wrong, it is true. There is a place for that. Self-inflicted consequences and hence punishment, retribution. God is punishing us. In the book that I mentioned last week, God's Problem, Bart Ehrman is saying that's exactly what was taught in the church. God is punishing us, so we need to repent. And it is true that there is, when I mentioned, for example, when you listen to the story of the Israelites in the Bible, what they go through is what? Punishment for what they have done. But what if it is not because of anything you've done wrong? We saw last week, Jeremiah 17:9, the heart of a man is wicked. It's possible that our wickedness needs to be dealt with. But what if you're blind, you're born blind, and it's not your fault, and it's not your parents' fault? John records for us a story in John chapter 9. They asked, Rabbi, who sinned that this man be born blind? Was it him or his parents? What was Jesus' response? None of the above. But it happened to him that the glory of God may be revealed. And how does the story end? Jesus heals the blind man, and the religious leaders are angry. The blind man goes and says, me, I don't care who he is, whether he's a prophet or not. What I know is one thing. I was, but now. And Jesus uses the story, which I think is the most important part of the story, to rebuke or speak into the spiritual blindness of those that thought the blind man was blind. They were spiritually blind. They were not seeing the light of the world, whom John introduces in John chapter 1. Right? So, did anyone sin? No. God is not necessarily punishing. Jesus is suggesting that some of the punishment, the suffering, through it, the glory of God can be revealed. Similarly, in the death of Lazarus, 2 chapters later, in John chapter 11, he tells Lazarus, his sister, Martha and Mary, didn't I tell you to believe? Only believe and the glory of God will be revealed. Some of these things are difficult to believe, but if the glory of God is going to be revealed, and is revealed indeed, isn't it a privilege? I dare to ask. Christian thought also suggests that God, besides human responsibility, God is sovereign. What does that mean? That there's nothing evil there is nothing so evil that human beings can do that God doesn't know and cannot turn around. Also, in utter contrast and contradiction, if you will allow, disturbingly, that there is nothing that you will do thinking it is out of your will that God has not allowed you to will. Shay. So if you're willing to rape, I'll go as extreme as that. If you're willing to murder, I'll go as extreme as that. If you're willing to tell a lie, I'll go as, quote unquote, low as that. Because some people think the other is greater than the other. Right? God has let you to do it. If he could stop you, if he had to stop you, if that's what you want him to do, he still can. He's the God who created the sun and stopped it when Joshua was at the battlefront. Didn't he? He's God who gave us Jesus through a virgin birth. Didn't he? Wait a minute. He's God who created all of us and designed that while the atmosphere will have nitrogen and everything, we just need oxygen. And we will take it in, and our lungs and our system will use that, send it into our blood, and we will be alive. Yes. That when you're sick and you're in the hospital, they will have to make sure they make oxygen. That God, if he has to stop you from doing something stupid, he can. When you do it, don't think you're great at doing stupid things. Unfortunately. My language may not be the best in the time. So what is the Bible full of? The Bible is full of stories of human beings not listening to God and doing their way. And God telling them that no matter what you do, sinfully, according to your free will, you are not sovereign. Some will say that God has allowed it for soul making. Somehow he refines our souls through the experience, the crucible of suffering. And we shall see next week what James says about it. Jesus in Luke, I had wanted to mention that. Luke 13, when they are bringing up the idea that those who are suffering because God is punishing them, he asks, you think that the people on whom the tower fell were much worse sinners than you all? And in the conclusion of that story in Luke 13, it says, unless you all repent, something even much worse, not just similar, is bound to happen on you, because you will perish much worse than that, because you've not repented. What we see in the Bible is also lament, despair. For example, I could go through everywhere, but look at the Gospel of Mark chapter 4. Jesus, God incarnate, is in the boat with his disciples, and the storm is about to consume them. What do you hear from them saying? Master, do you not care that we perish? Sometimes, even as Christians, that's our attitude. But if you read the psalmists, you will hear complaints. Lord, how long? Why do the wicked prosper? Why? While I suffer. Why, Lord, how long? The cry comes. The good thing, the Bible does not shy away from that. But also the Bible contains the place for hope. Isaiah, the prophet, proclaims, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Right? You know that, Isaiah 61? The same scroll that Jesus picks up in Luke chapter 4. Same script, declaring his arrival, announcing freedom, announcing the binding of the wounded. Do you understand? Announcing an end, or announcing the arrival of the year of liberty, the year of the Lord's favor. But ultimately announcing the coming of his kingdom, the phasing out of the current nature that is fallen, both of the world out there, but the human that is fallen and sinful and causing suffering upon self and others. That is phasing out. For all who turn to him, transformation and renewal comes. Sadly, in Christianity, and I need to highlight this, is the scourge also. And this is what makes suffering worse in our world. The scourge of the prosperity gospel. The idea that the believers are meant to live healthy and wealthy lives. Then it hits you. Then it hits them. Then they go into hiding. The idea that wellness is guaranteed, prosperity is guaranteed. You can even proclaim it. You can even declare it. If it has not arrived, you claim it. You understand? You can claim it and say it is mine. Health is mine. Healing is mine. Prosperity is mine. That Range Rover is mine. I dare you to claim Museveni's toilet, the one that he drives around. Claim it also. Claim it. Claiming you. The one that he drives around in his convoy, claim it also. How many do we have in the country? Claim it. Bakuwana. That hyper spirituality and hypocritical spirituality. To the point that they even claim that we are gods. And you wonder, if gods, then why does suffering hit us? Wait a minute. If we are gods, when suffering hits our relatives, why aren't we able to stop it or even get rid of it? All right? Or are we playing the sovereign role of I will deal with it anyway? All right? All these things have made suffering even more complicated because we can't be honest about it. We can't talk about it. You, even as a Christian, you can't come out to talk about and say, I am in pain, I'm struggling. I remember one young man told me that one of the main challenges and blessings that he has ever met is when he visited a church one day and the assistant pastor said, let us pray for our senior pastor because he's unable to be with us this morning because he's not well. And this guy was like, what? You mean you can say that the pastor is not well? How? Because he had never heard of it. Because pastors are not supposed to fall sick. Anyway, I have dared to imagine that in suffering there is privilege. And I know that some people will think this is an oxymoron. That they are two opposed. Privilege connotes or suggests advantage, all right? It suggests benefit, influence. It's good, it should be desired, not so? Privileges should be desired, not so? Am I suggesting that? No. I know it becomes problematic even to imagine little privilege in suffering, that we could suffer a little. All right? It even sounds perhaps insensitive. But I want to highlight privilege. Mothers, honestly, apart from those that have taken it on the other side, mothers will count it a privilege to bring life into this world. Not so, mothers? Mothers, oh yeah? Painful as it is, okay? Revolutionaries have counted it a privilege that the situations of their countries or places where they are, jurisdiction, have changed. Jesus says of himself, I give my life on my own accord. It looks as though it is a privilege for him to head to the cross because he is going to reconcile the lost, the wicked, the dead. He's going to bring them to life. He's going to reconcile us to the Father. It should not be assumed, however, that even if there is privilege in suffering, that therefore the sufferer is privileged or should benefit from the privilege. And this is where we're going into a specific story before I conclude. All right? In part of my research, or rather my dissertation, I highlight the fact that the sufferer does not necessarily need to witness this privilege or name it themselves, but sometimes they might. And one of those is myself. But a guy called Brady and his co-authors argue that some virtues like courage, fortitude, resilience, patience, benevolence, and compassion are dispositions that we cannot as human beings experience unless there's been some challenge of sorts. And suffering sometimes comes as such. And believe me, he suggests that without those, we cannot claim to have gone through the entire collection of human emotions and experience as we know them. To some extent, he suggests that is valuable. I would argue then it is a privilege. You could disagree, all right? I would not argue also that privilege is in every experience of suffering and pain, all right? Because the experience is negative. But I said earlier that if God is revealed or glorified in it, then why can't I call it a privilege? As one of the men that I will talk about right now says. All right? Job. What do we know about Job in the Bible? What do we know about Job in the Bible? Very rich man, wealthy, good family, flourishing business, also a spiritual man. At least what we know, he's a godly man. Not so? May I assume that, may I say, like one of you, or some of you, or all of you, you know, like any godly man you would know. He was known. The fact that it is on record, he was known, he was a godly man. And details are given. He even went on to offer sacrifice for his children, just in case any of them had sinned. That is how far he took it. But what do we know about Job? Right? He experienced total disaster. He lost everything. He lost his wealth. He lost his children. He lost his properties. He lost even the tools that he could have used to make more. But not only that, we also realize his health goes really bad. The only thing that Job still has, maybe not one, he has his life, and what does he have? He has his wife. He also has his friends. His friends and his wife have the worst theology about suffering, just like many church members do. All right? And I want to tell you that whatever happened to Job's family, rather whatever happened to Job that afflicted and affected him, directly and indirectly affected everyone and everything around him. Family, friends, employees, relatives. You understand? Everything around him fell apart. It was not just Job, but many were affected. Some of our suffering, if not all, not only affects us, but affects many others. All right? Hence, if there is anything to learn, anything to pick out of it, it should not only be for us, but also for others. So when we talk privilege, and that's why I insist, when I talk privilege, I don't want you to look at yourself alone. I don't want you to look at the sufferer alone. I want you to think about everyone else. In the case of Job, from chapter 3 onwards, chapter 3, Job spends it lamenting. And if you will look at chapter 3, Job says, let the day on which I was born and the night that said a man is conceived, let that day perish. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me? And it is describing, the knees. Those of you that have had kids, you know how you put your baby on the knee and pat them. But the idea of the work of the knee in receiving children. Why did the knee receive me? Or why the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Over and over through chapter 3, Job is lamenting. Chapter 1 and 2, God and die. He did not. One thing that comes out of Job's story is that his friends came, they had the wrong theology, and they blamed him for wrongdoing. They said they have never seen any God punish anyone that was righteous. Lord, Job, we know you're righteous, but the fact that God is punishing you, there must be something wrong. And Job said, no, I'm not. I didn't know anything. They said, you see, Job, you can't be. There's no one who is righteous as God. Obviously, there's something hidden. On and on, they went back and forth. Long story short, from chapter 4 to chapter 38, there is that wrong theology and discourse going on. But there are amazing stories, there are amazing lessons to learn, like Job saying that even if God slay him, he will still hold on to the God of his salvation. Job in chapter 19, he says, I know for sure my Redeemer lives. And many places where he brings out his confession. The main confession that comes out of that story of Job, that I pray that you never forget, in chapter 38, when everything has been said, Job is really tired and he says, God, I'm tired of all this human theology that is unhelpful. Can you come and we talk face to face? Can you come and explain yourself? I have counted on you. Like I'm sure some of you have cried. I have cried those tears. And God said, are you sure, Job? God tells Job in chapter 38 and onwards, and at various points, he says, okay, dress yourself up like a man and prepare like a man and stand up and let's talk if you are a man. So God begins asking Job, okay, Job, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Do you even know where the depths of the sea, the boundaries of the sea are? Do you know how much water is contained in them? Many things that God asks Job from chapter 38 up to the end of 41, to the beginning of 42. Job hears and Job says, my goodness. And God is not justifying what has happened to Job. Forget it. But Job, listen to Job's response. Because if it were you, you would have asked God, how does that concern me? You did all those things, so what? Why do I have to suffer for them? And you would rightly be asking the questions. But Job's response is clear. He says, I heard of you by the hearing of my ear, but now my eyes see you. That's a huge transition from only hearing about God to seeing him. When I get to that point over and over again, I say, wow, that language is complicated. To say you've seen God, difficult language in the Old Testament. No one sees God and does what? And lives. Job is claiming to have seen God. Wait a minute. This is not a statement coming out of mere materialistic restoration. No. It's not you and I coming, praise the Lord. I went through so much trouble and the Lord restored me. No. This is before Job is restored. No. It's before he's restored. He says, I have heard of you with my ears, but now I see you with my very own eyes. I think I would argue strongly that anyone that would move from hearing about God to seeing God with their own eyes is privileged. Believe me, it is a privilege. And I joined Job to argue it is a privilege. Right? Job is later restored, and we love that part of the story, don't we? God restores everything. His health. Gives him more children. Right? The same number, not so? Yeah? And I thought to myself, we don't get to see the latter part of Job. I wish we could sit down and I'm definitely having a conversation. I'm having coffee and pork ribs with that guy when we are in heaven. Right? Because for sure, that guy has stuff to talk about. By the way, it took so many years. It takes many years to restore your business empire. It takes many years to have 10 kids. Believe me, I have 7. All right? It takes many years. Job, it took many years for Job to be restored. We only get it in a few chapters. It is a summary. But I would love to have a conversation with a man that was privileged to know God better in his suffering, not in spite of it. For us, we know God better when we have a breakthrough. Right? I picked on a man called C.S. Lewis, and this one I'll go through quickly. The reason why I picked him up is because this man, when I was wrestling with my own experience, this man married a woman who was sick with cancer in the hospital. For sure, she was about to die. Not so? And he watched her die. He watched her pain become his own pain. And he journaled it. Did they call it journaling? Because I want to call it journaling, but mumuizo wa mujita journal. Okay? He journaled it, okay? Now, this guy, I want to read for you from this book. To C.S. Lewis, the sudden deprivation brought about a brief loss of faith. He asked, where is God? Go to him when you need him, when your need is desperate, when all other help is in vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face. He had become a Christian. He was a former atheist who became a Christian. His wife, whom he married, was a former, she had kids actually, older kids. They were both writers and academicians, and they fell in love. They married each other. He watched her die. And when I read this book, I was like, C.S. Lewis, I hear you, but I have a problem with your story. And that's why I'm coming to tell mine as well. I told you last week when I was introducing my own story that 5 years ago, if you told me that I'll be standing before people telling them about suffering, talking about suffering, you'd be kidding me. If you told me that this is what I would be thinking about every day, you'd be kidding me. You would be joking. Because there's no way I would disagree with you in every way. 5 years ago, a young man with a career in ascendance, all right? Could you go to the next slide? With a career in ascendance, young marriage, 3 kids, good paycheck, good life going on, and then things start to fall apart. For clarity, could you please switch off the light? Thank you. All right, so that is me in 2019. That is me in a similar gym, same place, in a different state. But I wanted to become a lawyer when I was 9. When I was 12, I decided to become an engineer, and I did become an engineer. But at 24, I discovered evangelism. And I said, thank you, engineering, I'm going for this. I became a pastor, I was priested at 31, and I became a leader and a teacher and a farmer and a father, and that's what I've been doing, and that's what I'm going to be doing. But what I never saw is that I'll be speaking about suffering. Because in 2019, while C.S. Lewis married his wife knowing she had cancer and she would die, my first wife had no evidence of cancer in her life. I want to assure you, and I'm happy to share such information, that she even decided that we would not use any family planning because she was cautious. She was like, I don't want to invite anything into my life. She said she avoided artificial stuff. She was very natural. She was like, no. And then one day, I'm out doing the evangelism that I'm committed to. I'm training pastors in Congo. And then she sends me a message and says, I am in deep pain. And I said, what's wrong? She said, I don't understand. It's been on for 2 days since you left. And I'm now actually not at home. I'm at my mom's. She's taking care of me. I'm taking TRAP. Do you know TRAP, Tramadol? It's a high-level painkiller. But she was taking one every 8 hours, and it had moved to 4 hours. I said, okay, see the doctor, and I'll come back. Third day, she says the same thing. I get on the next flight and return to Uganda. This is March. Within a space of 1 month, we had done surgery and found out that her gallbladder, is it a gallbladder? Her bladder and her liver were attached. Long story short, she had had this cancer of the liver for years, and we had no clue, or whether years or not. We had even just given birth in December to our last born, and it was not seen. And within a space of 1 month, coming to 1.5 months, we were laying her in the grave. She was gone, cancer of the liver. That's 2019. And I still had my muscles, and I still had that smile, and all was going well, and everything seemed okay. Not okay, of course. People said she was going to a better place. I read, C.S. Lewis says, you can't tell me that nonsense. She will always be in that better place with God eternally. Why didn't he leave her with me for the little time, the infinite time on this side? Do you get what I'm saying? And I battled with the same. I said, yes, C.S. Lewis, I agree with you. What I can't identify with is you chose it. And if you ask about C.S. Lewis, why, he chose it. I didn't. I didn't want that journey cut short. But what have I seen along the way? In as much as I was wounded by nature, my wife was taken away by cancer. A year later, hardly a year later, in 28th January 2020, to be specific, I'm riding my big bike. I'm going to do specific things. And a speeding car hits me from behind. Bang! It's a heavy bike, So I'm the lighter load, and I fly off. I have a good helmet. It's covering me, but because it is good and strong, it smashes through my clavicle, my scapula, and because of the impact of the landing, one rib in the left breaks and pierces into the left lung. The helmet is good enough that it manages to break through my jaw from this side to the other side. And in a moment, of course, apparently, the guy who hit me, another guy, decided to pick up my bag and pick out, this world is very evil. I'd just withdrawn money. I had 5 million in my bag, my rucksack. I'd just withdrawn 3.5, and I just done a business. The previous day, I'd sold chalk. I manufactured chalk. I'd sold chalk worth 1.75 million. And I'd combined the money, and I was going to do particular errands using the money. Send some to my mom, pay for a kind of garage, send to a friend who was in Nairobi trying to pay for his education. I was just going to do good things with this money. A thief wanted it. So I'm hit down, they pick my rucksack, they want to take it. They took the outer, there was money on the first part and the inner part. They took the one on the outside. But that's not, the money is a smaller issue. But a boda guy called Muhammad, mark that name, put me on his boda, said, tutasere vrandi, put me, because I was putting on my collar, put me on a boda with his friend, said, mukwate, and I'm just doing, my kids, that's all I was crying. They took me to Nigeria Hospital, they diagnosed me. The guy asked me, how many fingers has this? I said, 2. Zinengalo zilimeka, I said 4. Onomsaja chali mula mutu mwanguye. Gave me first aid, put me in an ambulance, took me to Mengo. Not Kampala Hospital, they couldn't help me, they sent me to Mengo. Nebanzunze Mengo, nebankomeo Kampala Hospital. I was unconscious. Next thing I know, I'm in ICU, 3 surgeries, 1.7 liters of blood drawn out of my lungs. And I'm here with you. But the impact meant that this hand would hardly function again. Bones were healed, the rib, the hole that was pierced in here, healed. My lungs spent how many months before I could breathe properly. When your lungs get a hole, you can't breathe properly. You dare to breathe, it's pain on the inside. I contracted COVID. It was the COVID year 2020. I contracted COVID, and coughing meant pain inside there. I pleaded with God. I actually had asked him earlier, why didn't you take me first? Why did you take Brenda first? Because it had become hard raising the kids. And I remember in that moment, he asked, do you still want to go? And I said, Linda, you understand? I still want to raise the kids, but I'd seen his grace. And I want to tell you, one of my friends, he said, when they came to see me in the hospital, he kept hearing me here saying, God has got my back. God has me. Now, friends, the fact that I survived is even confusing, because why didn't I go? Because my kids wouldn't be the first full orphans, would they? No. But I stayed, I wrestled, and widowhood, absence, everything. It was difficult going through all that. I tried to distract myself with the masters that I did, and it did not work. First, then when I got this accident, it meant that I couldn't continue with my education. I deferred for 6 months. I came back. It was difficult to go. But friends, the church is one of the most complicated places for you believers and I to suffer. As a priest, and I dare say, I thought I belonged to a family of priests, and I would be surrounded. And I can't say I wasn't. I had friends around. But as time went on, weeks, months, I discovered I was in this thing. It was not anyone's suffering. It was not anyone's pain. It was alone. It was personal. And I know that it does get personal. But it gets terrible when people think their theology is the best around suffering. And they begin asking you, but don't you think there are some things you have not dealt with in your family? Generational curses and the like? Don't you think you should say certain manner, Raymond, I remember one particular person said, we went into a disagreement. She thought I'd done something wrong, and I said I didn't. And you think you're a reverend, you. No wonder these things are happening to you. And I said, are you sure? I told her one day, I hope you apologize. I hope you apologize. Anyway, friends, it was very difficult. And I remember one day going to do ministry to young people, and they had these many questions. And I looked at their questions and had some answers to give them. But I was confused. Those questions, I got them from a particular school. And I remember saying, but God, I have my own. I have my own. Will you please answer them? Will you please answer my own questions? And I remember these questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? They pray and fast. The wrong people get all the good things. And I knew I wasn't good, but I remember a young man who took me out for breakfast at Cafe Java's. And the reason was, Raymond, my faith is failing. When I look at you, I'm inspired. I don't know many people who would go out and be a missionary to Karamoja like you did. I saw your passion. I saw how you gave yourself. I've seen your impact. I've seen what you're doing. How would go? When I saw your wife die, I thought, okay, they die. But why wouldn't he protect you? Why? He said, my faith is struggling. This wasn't his pain. It was mine. But it was becoming his. And his faith was struggling. Brenda's, before she died. And of course, when she died, she left it with me. In the month, do you notice that date, 19th January? I got my accident on the 28th of January. A friend of mine was driving it. I'd given it to him to go and get his wife from hospital. She had given birth at the beginning of the month, and he was returning it. That's what happened to him. And in honor of Brenda, it cost me a lot of money to restore it because I couldn't imagine. And in the journey of restoring it, that's how it was taken away. So on 10th June, that's what it looks like, having been restored. The cost was insanely high. And of course, the guy couldn't afford it. I had to incur it. Now, that is not the main thing. Because when you look at the car, you're like, hey, wait, is it the same one? Yes, it is the same car, restored. Can you go to the next slide, rather? In September 2021, along the way, I can't tell this, I mean, the time is gone, I feel so bad. Who brought clocks, by the way? Who created clocks? I hate it. But I think I need to tell a short story. When I had the accident, listen, when I had the accident, you can turn off because they've seen, that's my wife. We had 6 kids at the time, and now we have 7, all right? God is gracious, right? Because I got remarried, and I'm not saying he's gracious because I got remarried, but I want to tell you this journey. When I got the accident, and the hand wasn't restored, I took a trip to the UK for neurosurgery. My pain doctor discovered that I had a brachial plexus injury. 3 nerves, C5 and C6 and C7 were injured. Nerves are like electric lines in the body. They were injured, they were broken, and they drew back into the nerve, into the spine. It would take them long to regenerate. So he said, we can have nerve grafting, you can have neurosurgery. So he arranged with a friend of his who is a neurosurgeon, and I flew into the UK in March when COVID was shooting high, right? I go to London and I do this, what do you do with a doctor? Consultancy. The guy checks me and he schedules 19th of March as my next day of check to do a proper MRI scan, and then they can make a decision how they're going to conduct the neurosurgery. Meaning, they would get one of the functional nerves, put it on my hand, and power it. And he told me, I can give you between 40 to 60% of function. And I think it's good enough. One of my friends thinks, a very good brother of mine, thinks that this surgery did not happen because he believes that there is hope that we could get an artificial hand onto my body. Now, it's a joke, obviously, right? I don't want to take him seriously. But what I saw in that place is interesting because this is March. On the 18th, the president declared the lockdown, not so? And he gave us 3 days. Those who want to return, return. If you stay, stay. All right? So I checked with the doctor. The doctor said, you know what? You're on a medical visa. You can stay indefinitely until the pandemic has subsided, right? Because at the time, UK was among #1 category countries. Or you can go back into your country, and when the pandemic goes down, we can call you back. I spent about 10 days there. From the 10th to the 19th is when I returned. I was supposed to have my MRI scan. Guess what, guys? I remembered I had 3 kids who didn't have a mother. I decided to return to my country. I have never returned for the same thing. I've returned, but not for the same thing. But there is something that came out of that trip, and that is the story of my remarriage. I lived with a retired couple, a 70-year-old doctor and his 65-year-old wife. And I couldn't believe the life they were living. And though I came back and spent 16 days in quarantine, I was depressed and disturbed. That memory never went away. And though I complained to God why he wasn't where he was in my situation, he asked me, have you really not learned or picked anything from this experience? And that memory came back to me. And somehow I felt like I wanted to live this life, but how was it going to be possible? At the time I was angry at God. I didn't want anything to do with women, blah, 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 blah. And then I went on a journey of thinking, wait, what would it mean to live that kind of life? Now, beyond everything else, among other things, I have had, like Job, the privilege of having sober, plain, uncensored, honest conversations with God. Of Mukama Manyi, Chino Nedda Olimba, no Lord, you're lying. Why? You understand? You may fear to say such things to God, but I have heard. But there is one particular thing I know, is that if it wasn't for him, like the psalmist says, guys, there are times I closed the door of my bedroom and my kids didn't see me the entire day because I was depressed. I didn't want them to see me that way. I was confused about life. I wished I wasn't there to see that I was confused about life. But they needed me. They needed me because they were grieving and they were confused as well. So friends, was I privileged to go through these things? Have I been privileged to go through these things? I would say yes and no. And I think next week, as we conclude, even with your own questions, I would want to argue that there's been a sense of privilege. I see suffering differently. I see pain differently. I know it when you say you're feeling pain. Because with this hand, I lived on 10 painkillers a day. Then I moved to 7. Then I moved to 5. Then I moved to 3. Then I moved to 1. But in all that journey, God sustained me. Guess what? I'm right-handed. This hand stayed put. My dissertation was 25,000 words. I typed it using this hand. They asked me to use assistance. I tried it and it didn't work. I did it with this hand. I carry my baby with this hand. I drive around with this hand. God spared. Now you'll ask me, what about those whose he hasn't spared? I'm not saying their situation is okay. I'm only telling my story. You understand? And I say that today, I don't know how, I can't number how many people God has enabled me to encourage and to journey with. It is a privilege. A brother of mine has said, you are an elder. I look at you as an elder. God has made an elder out of you. Did I ever ask God to make me an elder? No. Am I privileged to be an elder? I don't think so. But if it is be so, let it be. All right? Will this hand be healed and I use it again? I don't know. What if God doesn't heal it? Job says, even if he slay me, yet I will trust in the Lord of my salvation. I had heard of him, but I have seen God sustain me. With my one hand, I feed and sustain a family of 10, me and my wife and my 7 kids. It's not me, it is the Lord. And it is me standing before you. I am privileged to tell my story. Job may not have told his, but I'm privileged to tell my story. And I'm sorry for subjecting you for an extra couple of minutes of suffering, almost 30 of them. But shall we pray? Lord, what a difficult topic to talk about. And on a personal level, Lord, I want to thank you because I couldn't imagine relieving the pain that I've been through, that you've taken me through. But I know it's because of you that I've actually journeyed, and I can smile and I can stand before people and I can talk about it. Real life experiences. And I know that the people before me and many others have gone through even perhaps more difficult ones. I may not know their stories, but Lord, you know every story. And I pray that the way you have done it, whether with Job, the Karimo Jong, C.S. Lewis, or myself, that Lord, you will uphold them. Difficult as it may be, may you give them the boldness to bring every pain, the courage to bring every lament, every confusion before you, Lord. Oh Lord, how you've stripped me naked and laid me down. But because it is you, and I know it was you, and because it was you, Lord, I can tell the story, and I can say I'm privileged. And I pray for those for whom the wounds are too deep to even imagine privilege. I pray for those for whom the scars are fresh, the wounds are fresh. I pray that, Lord, that they may not look to me or to Job or to anyone else, but to you, to the cross of Jesus Christ. And if there be any answers, Lord, I pray that they will walk away with them. I have felt the pain, I have felt the grief, I have felt the confusion, the despair. But Lord, I have known you. And I pray that they will know you more than ever before. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you guys. Oh God.